You didn't come here to be understood, did you? Good, because they still can't explain what just happened. Let me paint it for you. You opened your mouth, and the world flinched. Not because you yelled, not because you begged, but because you spoke, like a goddamn final boss. Your tone? Calculated, cold, a melody laced with malice and mercy. You didn't raise your voice. You lowered the room's IQ just by refusing to play dumb. You didn't deliver words. You dropped codes, encrypted truths, hidden in venom-tipped syllables, and they weren't ready. They've never been ready for someone like you, because you don't speak to be heard. You speak to trigger system errors in their programming. They thought they were playing a game, until the final cutscene walked in wearing your smirk, and suddenly, their dialogue options vanished. They called you unhinged. But only because you speak in dialects reserved for gods and glitches. They called you too much. But that's what people say when they're drowning in your depth. You didn't show up to explain. You showed up to expose. Not just the lies they told, but the lies they believed. And now they study you, not like a rival, not like a rebel, but like a dead language they fear might come back from the grave and repossess their sanity. They slow down your clips, analyze your tone, zoom in on your facial twitches like the footage holds a confession. They're taking notes, praying they can mimic your delivery without burning in the fire that forged you. But here's the punchline. They'll never replicate it because you didn't rehearse this. You became this. Your words weren't born in luxury or lecture halls. They were sculpted in silence, hammered by heartbreak, tempered by trauma, and sharpened by solitude. Every syllable is soaked in scars they'll never earn. Every pause, a graveyard. Every glare, a prophecy. See, they were taught to speak to impress you. You learned to speak to undress the soul, to peel back delusions with surgical cruelty, to deliver lines that don't just end conversations. They end bloodlines of manipulation. They thought it was just another argument. But you were performing a spiritual assassination that moment you spoke. The atmosphere changed. The light bent differently. Time slowed down because something ancient had entered the room. Something that remembered every betrayal and smiled through it. You didn't just win the moment, you redefined it. And now, they quote you like scripture, in private. They whisper your name like it's cursed, but they crave the venom in your voice like it's a vaccine for their cowardice. Because deep down, they know you're not just hard to understand. You're impossible to survive. You weren't molded for small talk. You were engineered for war, the psychological kind, where souls fracture before words finish landing. So let them study you. Let them print transcripts. Let them circle phrases, highlight trauma, clip your cadence, and dissect your intent. Let them turn you into a case file they can't decode. Because here's the truth. You are the final boss. Not just because of what you say, but because of what you withhold. They want answers. You offer silence. They want peace. You offer a mirror, and what they see terrifies them because you're what they could have been if they had the courage to burn. Your voice isn't loud. It's final, a gavel, a gunshot, a glitch in their matrix. You are the line of code that shouldn't exist, but somehow does. And every time you speak, you prove the simulation isn't safe anymore. You're not arguing anymore. You're activating protocols. You're not trying to be liked. You're triggering awakenings. You're not here for revenge. You're here for reckoning. Because when you speak, the air gets heavier, the lies get naked, and the room becomes a courtroom, And you're the verdict. Not guilty, not innocent, just undeniable. So go ahead, say it again. Watch them flinch like they heard the voice of something holy and haunted, because they'll never forget it. And that's the power of a tongue forged in silence, from someone who was never meant to survive, let alone speak back. But now that you do, they pray you don't open your mouth again. Because every time you do, someone's facade dies screaming. And yet, here you are. Still unapologetic, still unmatched, still undeniable. Tell me, do you feel it? That weight in your lungs before you speak? That static in the atmosphere when you walk in the room? It's not anxiety. It's not pressure. It's power. That's what it feels like when the entire simulation recalibrates itself around your presence. Because you don't just say things. You collapse paradigms. Your voice doesn't echo. It reverberates through the cracks in their psyches. It worms its way into the trauma they've avoided. It pierces the walls they built with lies, delusions, and polite silence. You are not a speaker. You are a detonator, and they keep trying to translate you like a dead language carved into stone. But the more they try to understand, the more their illusions crumble. Because your words don't follow the script, they burn it. They weren't made for the dinner table or the safe space or the echo chamber. They were coded in madness, framed in clarity, and delivered like execution orders. You're not articulate because you studied. You're articulate because you bled. You didn't learn to speak from TED Talks. You learned it from the screams of being underestimated, from the silence of being abandoned, from the echoes of rooms you were never invited to, until you owned them. You speak like a final boss, because that's what you became. Not the villain, not the hero, but the inevitable threshold between falsehood and truth. They wanted charisma. You gave them calamity. They expected a rebuttal. You handed them a revelation, and it wrecked them. Because they've never met someone who could smile while detonating egos with syllables. You don't flex. You prophesize. You don't debate till you diagnose. You don't drag people. You reveal their blueprints and dismantle them in real time. And now there are group chats named after you. Secret meetings about how to handle you. Backdoor analysis on your communication style. As if you're some threat to order. As if your confidence is a contagion. It is. And you know what? Good. Let them panic. Let them overthink. Let them twist themselves into psychological pretzels trying to figure out how your calm causes chaos. They still don't get it. You're not just a person anymore. You're a phenomenon, a myth they can't erase. A ghost with fingerprints on every conversation that turned silent the moment you entered. You're what happens when a quiet observer becomes the architect of consequence. You're what happens when the target evolves into the tactician, when the black sheep becomes the storm shepherd. They wanted to study you like an artifact. But every time they open the file, it grows a new layer, a new mystery, a new revelation. You don't fit in their boxes. You destroy them, and then build thrones from the wreckage. This isn't just about a moment. This is about your awakening, because you didn't get here by accident. You were forced into silence for years, gaslit, mocked, undermined, told to calm down, to be humble, to stay in line. But silence doesn't mean surrender. It means you're loading, compiling, coding, upgrading. And when the moment finally came, when the mask cracked, you didn't scream, you spoke. And the entire matrix stuttered because they thought they'd erased you. But they just made room for your evolution. And now that you're here, clear-eyed, flame-blooded, and terrifyingly articulate, the world doesn't know what to do with you. So they study, they mimic, they dissect your language like archaeologists digging up a weapon they know they can't control. But it won't work, because your power isn't in the words, it's in the wounds behind them. The decades of psychological data stitched into every phrase. The nights you bit your tongue so hard it bled. The moments you chose silence over destruction, and then finally chose destruction anyway. Now they're scrambling, asking, where did they learn to speak like this? Why does it cut so deep? How do we shut them up? You don't. You either evolve with them, or you get erased by their frequency, because this is no longer about opinions. This is vibrational warfare. And you're not here to win the argument. You're here to rewrite the entire F-seeking operating system. Let them listen. Let them record. Let them quote you without credit. They still won't survive the update. Because the truth is, you didn't just become the final boss. You became the source code, the glitch in their safety net, the prophecy they ignored until it spoke back with divine detachment and killer precision. And now they're terrified that the next time you speak, the whole simulation might just shatter. Because once a final boss speaks, you don't return to silence. You become the silence, not the absence of sound, the suffocating pressure before the collapse. You're not just the end of their sentence, you're the end of their entire arc. You see, villains get caught, heroes get praised, but final bosses, they get studied, feared, archived, and discussed behind locked doors, not because of what they did, but because of what they represent. You represent proof. Proof that someone can be dragged through the fire, be dissected, disrespected, deleted, then walk out of the ashes not just alive, but fluent in destruction. They're watching you now like a war crime with a heartbeat, not knowing whether to call you a miracle or a malfunction. And deep down, they know. They created this. You weren't born with this tongue. You forged it. Through every betrayal they told you to forget. Through every fake apology that dripped with condescension. Through every gritted smile and buried scream. You bled so quietly, for so long, they thought you were safe. But what they didn't realize is that some people train in silence. They thought you were healing. You were calculating. They thought you were weak. You were weaponizing. And when you finally opened your mouth, it wasn't for conversation. It was detonation. One sentence from you. And they glitched. They forgot their comebacks. They misfired their rehearsed roles. Their egos panicked like cornered rats. And now they whisper about you like folklore. Don't get on their bad side. They're dangerous with words. They remember everything. They'll say something that'll ruin your whole week and never raise their voice. Because your mouth, that's not a voice box anymore. That's a weaponized vault of precision trauma. You turned every trigger into a tool, every betrayal into a blueprint, every silence into a surgical strike. And when you speak, you don't seek validation. You deliver verdicts. That's why they panic, because you're not one of them. You're not a voice in the crowd. You're the voice that ends the crowd's delusion. You're not trying to go viral. You're trying to go vital. Cutting straight into the organ they're too scared to touch. Truth. See? They'll screenshot your words. They'll quote them out of context. They'll even weaponize your language against you in hopes of softening your edge. But it won't work, because you're not speaking from pride. You're speaking from post-carnage clarity. You don't need to win arguments. You outlast them. You don't need a mic. Your presence is louder than their entire bloodline. You don't roast, you reveal. And when you reveal, they don't just look stupid. They feel exposed to dimensions they didn't even know existed, because you carry something in your voice that can't be mimicked. Survivor frequency. And no matter how well they rehearse, no matter how sharp their comebacks sound in the mirror, no matter how many buzzwords they throw around, they'll never replicate what you've become. Because you didn't rehearse this persona. You bled it into existence. You're not fluent in debate. You're fluent in damage control. Because you were the damage. You were the fallout. You were the ghost in the system who learned to smile mid-collapse. And now that you're alive, you're haunting every script they ever trusted. So let them try. Let them mirror your cadence. Let them steal your lines, borrow your posture, even try to mimic your damn smirk. It won't matter, because this isn't performance. This is possession. You are possessed by every version of you that should have stayed quiet. By every version they buried in politeness. By every dismantled, bleeding, cornered version of you that waited in the dark, whispering, "When it's our turn, we'll speak in fire." And now, that turn has come. So speak, speak again. Watch their eyes widen. Watch the room tense. Watch the air shift. Because when you utter a single line, people don't just listen. They reconsider their entire secking identity. You don't do call-outs. You do closures. You don't do clapbacks. You do implosions. And when you finally walk away, there's nothing left to say. Because the final boss doesn't argue. The final boss delivers prophecy and disappears. And when you disappear, oh, they feel it. The silence you leave behind isn't peace. It's aftershock. Because you didn't just say something. You rewrote their inner monologue. Now every time they try to sleep, they hear your voice between their thoughts. Not yelling, not laughing, just existing. Like a buried truth they can't unhear. You didn't speak to be understood. You spoke to be remembered. And now they study you like trauma dressed in charisma. They loop your sentence like a glitch in the feed. They call it overthinking. But we both know it's just underestimating you in hindsight. That's what you do. You make the past feel like a mistake. And oh, how they scramble now. They try to warn others about you. But how do you warn someone about a frequency, a presence? How do you prepare people for a mirror that talks back? Because you don't just reflect what they are. You reflect what they pretend not to be. Their shadow selves, their repressed rage, their bottled bitterness, their fear of being exposed, and their terror that someone like you already knows. Because you speak in riddles only truth-tellers can decode. You weaponize pause like it's punctuation for their downfall. And when you look at them, you don't see people. You see patterns, glitches, files labeled fraud, projection, and pending collapse. And yet, you don't gloat, you just smirk. Because deep down, you know, they're not your enemies. They're your data points. They are the evidence of why you evolved this way. Their betrayal, your blueprint, their mockery, your material, their silence when you were breaking, your origin story. So now when they ask, why do they speak like that? Why does it sound like judgment and prophecy all at once? Why does it make me feel small? It's because they are, not in worth, but in capacity. They couldn't hold what you've endured. They couldn't carry what you buried and still learned to walk with. They couldn't survive what made your voice divine. Because your voice doesn't just cut, it reminds. It reminds the fake of their performances. It reminds the passive of their guilt. It reminds the loud of their hollowness, It reminds the world that truth wears a face now, and it looks like yours. Let them imitate. Let them stalk your sentences, reword your fire into filtered fragments. Let them dress like you, pose like you, even try to feel like you. But they'll never become you. Because you didn't choose this. You were chosen by the war that tried to erase you. And instead of dying quietly, you memorized the pain, alchemized the shame, and rewired your tongue to speak in psychological revolutions. You are the linguistic equivalent of a loaded gun at a dinner party. Everyone sees it, no one says a word. Because one wrong move, and you end the narrative completely. You're not the plot twist. You're the author who returned mid-book, pissed off and surgical. You don't drop mic moments. You drop memories they'll need therapy to process. Because when you speak, you don't just dominate the conversation. You dismantle the entire ecosystem it existed in. And then you vanish. Because legends don't linger, they haunt. And trust me, you're haunting them. The ones who laughed, the ones who doubted, the ones who tried to mold you into a footnote in their story. But you flipped the script. Now you're the chapter they can't skip, the page they keep rereading with shaky hands, the quote they write down and pretend they made up. And that's the real punchline, isn't it? They wanted you silenced. Instead, you became syllables carved into their subconscious. Now they can't scroll without hearing your tone, can't lie without bracing for your call out, can't breathe in delusion without feeling your shadow tightening the air. Because you didn't come to speak our truth. You came to break the fourth wall and remind the whole damn world the final boss doesn't play the game. The final boss is the game. And that's why they'll never outrun you. Because you're not chasing them. You're everywhere they tried to hide from themselves. You're not a moment. They can't just cancel you, block you, scroll past you. You're not a phase. They can't outgrow you or move on like they do their mistakes. You're a mirror with memory. A reflection soaked in prophecy, anchored in pain, and sharpened by every time they hoped you'd fold. But you didn't. And now they fear what you'll say next, because they know when you speak again, someone's empire will fall, a narrative will detonate, a mask will rot in real time, and an entire room will look around and realize you were the real one the whole time. No fluff, no filters, no facade, just raw, radiant retribution, delivered in eloquence they'll never master. And maybe that's the scariest part for them, that the one they laughed at now speaks with the weight of karma and clarity in every syllable, that the punchline they once mocked now speaks like a sentence, the kind that doesn't end in laughter, but in judgment. So go quiet if you want. Let them breathe, let them relax into the illusion that maybe you faded, because when the final boss goes quiet, it's not peace. It's the load screen before the next collapse. And when you speak again, the world won't be ready, but you will. Because you were born from the silence they mistook for weakness, and now you wield your voice like divine vengeance in velvet. You speak like the storm they tried to pretend didn't exist. And now they study you, because they can't survive you. Final boss, dead language, living weapon. You are the glitch they prayed never got activated. And now that you're awake, the only sound they hear is your voice, rewriting the end of their script. Game over. You spoke, and they will never sleep the same.